Well, what I'd like to get into next is talking about adjusting color with curves and getting a little bit more into adjustment layers. So yesterday we talked a bit about adjustment layers, and we worked on one particular image, an image of an old radio and an antique fan, and I have that image open now. And before we get into adjusting color using curves, I just want to see what we have in this file and show you a little bit more of what you can do with adjustment layers. So let's take a look. So the way I usually work is the bottommost layer in my layers panel is always my original picture. And I never change that layer. And that way, if I ever screw up anything where I decide after making a print that I made some sort of change I didn't like, I can always get rid of it because the original image is always there at the bottom. Then above that we have all of my adjustment layers, and the way the layers work is as if you're standing at the top of the layers panel looking down. And in order to see this original image that is at the bottom, you have these things, the adjustment layers, that are blocking your view. In each one of those adjustment layers, if all they're doing is brightening or darkening your image, it's kind of like having sunglasses between you and your image. It's darkening the image, but it's not applying to everything. The mask is saying it can't apply to the whole image, it can only apply to certain areas. But whenever I do this, if I add a new adjustment, I always add the new adjustment to the top of the stack. The top of the stack is what is thought of as being applied last. If, on the other hand, I put an adjustment, a new adjustment, underneath one of these, it can be somewhat unpredictable how it acts because it's acting on only what's underneath it and not what's on top. And it can make it confusing as to how things are working. But if you always make sure your top layer is active before you add a new adjustment layer, then you won't get weird looking end results because it will be thought of as being applied after these. So let's take a look at a little bit more about adjustment layers. Remember, you can turn off the eyeball icon on any one to disable it, to see what it looked like before. And so I could come down here and turn off each one of these, and you'd see what the image looked like as it progressed. Once I get to the bottom, you see the original picture. And you can also click on an eyeball and just drag up the column if you want to turn on a bunch of them to see the difference. The keyboard shortcut that I used yesterday for quickly hiding all those extra layers and only showing the original was to move my mouse onto the eyeball icon for the original image and then hold down the Option key, Alt and Windows, and just click on it. That will quickly turn off all the other eyeballs so all you're seeing is the original picture. When I Option click it a second time, it will turn those layers back on. And so I can see what kind of change I made to this picture. And yesterday, my screen was not adjusted and it was overly dark, so it was hard for me to kind of see what I was doing. And so now when I look at the same image today, I see that this area in the upper right is darker than the area on the left. I would have gotten those to look just right and all that had I known, but I didn't have a great view of my image. With any one of these adjustments, if you just glance in your layers panel and you look at a mask, it's only where the mask is white that it's allowing the adjustment to apply. So if I just glance down these masks, I can tell what each layer is working on. This one here is working on the edge of the picture. So that's me vignetting or darkening the edge. This one here is working on the right side of the picture, but not the fan, because I can see the shape of the fan there, because only the white areas are where the adjustment applies. This one's the upper right corner, and so on. So if I wanted to tone down the adjustment that is adjusting this wood right here because I think it's a little bit too dark, I could just glance at those thumbnails and look for the one that has just this area in white in the thumbnail. So if I just glance up all these, it's got to be this layer here most likely. Doesn't it look like that's the one that would isolate that area? So I make that active, and if I want to lessen the adjustment, I have two ways I could do that. The first way is I could change the adjustment itself. And a quick way to look at the adjustment is to double click on the thumbnail image or the little icon that represents curves. If you double click there, it should bring up that adjustment. And I could take the dot that's darkening the image and just move it up. Remember, it's like a dimmer switch. So it just means the dimmer's been moved down too far if it was too dark. So that's one way I could do it. The other way I could do it is if I want to lessen an adjustment with that adjustment active, I could click on the word opacity at the top of my layers panel. Just click there and drag towards the left, and that will lower the opacity and lessen that adjustment. And so if it's too strong, I can do that. Let's talk a little bit more about the masks. I was really sloppy when working on these masks, and we're going to see that in a few minutes here. Let's see what we can do to a mask. When you grab the paintbrush tool and you're working on an adjustment layer, most of the time you want the paint that you're putting in to go into the mask. And if the last thing you had done was create that adjustment layer, the mask would automatically be active. But if the last thing you did was switch what layer is active, like I just did, I switched which one of these adjustment layers is active, that might not be the case. If you look here, the way you can tell what is active is by where there's kind of little brackets on the corners of things. And do you see it right here? And it's not over here on the mask. That means if I grab the paintbrush tool right now, my paint most likely won't go into the mask. So if you switch between the layers, be sure you click on the mask to get those little corners to appear on the mask so that it's active, and if you grab the paintbrush tool, that's where your paint goes. So if you're switching between the layers, you might want to just be clicking on the masks instead of the name of the layer, or over here on the other side. If you just click on the mask each time you change layers, you know it's going to stay active, and therefore your paint will go where you expect it to. I can disable a mask temporarily, turn it off, to see what the adjustment that's in that layer would look like if it applied to the entire picture. So what I do is I go to any mask and I hold down the Shift key. With the Shift key held down, I click within the mask thumbnail in my layers panel. So right now I'm holding Shift and I'm going to click right in that mask. And now the image changed, so it looks to me like this particular adjustment is brightening the picture. And when I turn the mask off, instead of only brightening the radio, it's brightening the entire picture. And so I could do that just to see if I would like to paint some more on that mask to maybe have it apply to other areas. But holding down Shift and clicking on a mask will disable the mask temporarily, allowing that adjustment to affect the whole image. And you'll see a big red X through it so you know it's turned off. To turn it back on, you hold Shift again and you click on it. So Shift is the disable or re-enable. You can also view the contents of the mask. This little thumbnail you see in your layers panel is just a small representation of your mask. The actual mask is the same size as your picture. And if you want to see it over here where your picture is, you can hold down the Option key in a Mac, Alt in Windows, and you click on the mask. Now I'm looking at it. And that's a really good thing to do when you think you're done with your document. Because if I look at that mask, I'm not done painting in it. I can see gaps in between my paint strokes, or I can see some kind of grayish white coming through. And so I can grab my paintbrush right now, get a bigger enough brush, and just come in here and cover up any little gaps that I can see in my paint strokes. I also notice down here, usually if I have an area like that on the edge of my picture, it means I had a panel open, like the actual adjustment panel where I was adjusting my curve, and it was covering up that part of the picture, and so I didn't know I didn't get paint down there, unless I remember trying to adjust that part of the picture. And then here I see the shape of this, and to me it doesn't quite look like the shape of a radio. I don't remember the radio doing that in the corner, right? So the way I got this to be visible is I held down the Option key, Alt in Windows, and I clicked on the thumbnail for the mask. That's the same way you stop viewing it. So now I might know that that mask was extending beyond the radio down over in this area. So I could paint with black right now and possibly edit that mask a little better, right? But wouldn't it be nice to be able to see both the mask and the picture at the same time? Because then I could see how the mask lines up with the picture and see how accurate it was. You can do that. With any one of these adjustment layers active on my keyboard, right above the return or the enter key is the / key. Not the / that you use when you access websites and you type in the URLs. For it, the other one, the one you never hit. It's right above the return or enter. Watch what happens when I press it. Now, all it did was take the mask and overlay it on top of the picture as a red overlay. And I can paint while it's in this view. And as long as the mask has its little corners highlighted, it means the mask is active, so that any paint that I put on, that's where it's going to go. It's not going to go on the actual picture. And I could come in here and modify the mask to say, hey, that should be a little closer to the radio. Maybe across the top here too. And you can always switch your foreground and background colors. If you paint with black, it'll add to where the red stuff is. The red stuff indicates we are not adjusting the picture. And where the picture looks normal is where the adjustment is applying. And I can see a little red overspray onto the radio. Can you guys see that? A little red overspray. So I could switch my foreground and background colors to paint with white. And then I could come in here and say, hey, get off of that area. Sometimes I cheat. If I click right here and I hold the Shift key and I click right here, it will draw a straight line for me between those two spots. And so if you ever have any straight lines in your picture, you can click on one edge of it, hold down Shift, and then click on the other. There I think I went just a little too far up, so I'll choose Undo. Shift. And so Shift clicking connects the dots between where you click once and where you click a second time. So it can be kind of nice. When you're done viewing the red overlay, you can press the / key a second time and you're back to viewing the image as you normally would. So what I would suggest you do is after you work an image like this is go to each one of your masks and maybe hit that / key. You might have wanted to do it right after you were done painting on the mask, just to confirm that you painted where you thought you did. And you can see things like right here, I can see where the mask is not quite, doesn't look solid. And so I can come over here and paint with black. Black adds to the red stuff and just say, okay, fill that in. I can't tell, there might have been some stuff in there. That kind of thing. I can do that. I can also option click the mask and see if there's any gaps in my paint strokes, because it's very common to get them. And I can go up to the next mask, option click on it. And I don't know if I wanted that little gap there. So I might turn off that mask by option clicking on it and just watch that area where the gap was and say, is there any reason for that? Maybe see it as a color overlay with / and say, is there any reason for that little gap I was seeing? No, it looks like I was just sloppy. So I'll come in here and paint with white, get that to more accurately reflect the area that I was attempting to adjust. And I think that gap was down here, so I'll paint with black and see if that looks different as I paint across it, and yes, it does. Your masks don't have to look perfect because other people are not going to see them. But the masks can tell you where you should inspect your image to see if they need to be more accurate. When I'm painting, I'm frequently pressing the letter X. X exchanges my foreground and background colors. So I change from painting with black to painting with white. So if I want to take away from the mask, I can do it quickly. I hit the letter X and now I'm adding to it. So I want to add these little corners. That kind of thing. When I'm done, I hit the same key that I used to get the overlay, which is the / key. So I go to each one of my masks. I hit / to say, hey, how does it line up with stuff? I was real sloppy on some of these. And I come in and say, all right, fine, I need to fill in some of these areas that I didn't get. Remember, with masks, though, you don't have to use your paintbrush as your only way of doing things. You can use things like the quick selection tool. And you can come in here and select an area. And yesterday I had some keyboard shortcuts written on the board. I don't know if you got them written down or not, but the one for filling with your foreground color was Option Delete. That's Alt Backspace in Windows. So I could type that. And I can come in here and make selections of various things, Option Delete, to get it to fill in the mask. We could talk for weeks about making masks accurate and things. And so, it all depends how who the client is as far as you're doing things for and how picky they are. Some people are the kind of clients I'd love to have that are not picky, and you can just be really fluid with it. I'm the pickiest client you'll ever run into, and if you look at some of my other images, you'll see my masks can be crazy detailed. So anyway, when I'm done, I think I've cleaned it up. I'll option click on it to view it, to see if there's any gaps in my paint strokes or other things I couldn't see, because oftentimes there are, and I'll come in there with my brush and fix them. This could use a lot of fixing in various areas, but I'll option click each one of those masks to double check that there's not any big surprises in them. Right? Make sense overall? So what was it? Shift click a mask to disable it. You get the red X through it. Option click a mask, which is alt clicking in Windows, to view it directly. Backslash with a mask to view it as a colored overlay. Now if you want to remember this, over here on the board, it talks about masks. And remember that the little corners mark tells you what's active. So if it's not active, click on the mask in your layers panel to make it active. You shift click the mask to disable it, option click to view it, backslash for overlay. I haven't talked about this, but you can command click on a mask to load it as a selection, where the areas that are being adjusted will suddenly be selected. They'll have little marching ants around them that indicates a selection. I mean, if you want to see on my screen real quick, I will just move my mouse on top of one of the masks. I'll hold down the command key, which is control in Windows, and I'll just click on it. See, I got a selection. I'll click on another one. And I can do that to each one. That can be useful if you want to do, let's say, a blur filter on that area. Well, you got it selected. Or if you want to make a new adjustment and have it only affect the same area as one of your others, command click on the mask. So that's what this talks about. Command clicking on the mask loads it as a selection. In addition to that, you could hold down the Shift key and it would add to a selection that was already on your screen. Or you could hold down the Option key, which is Alt in Windows, to take away from a selection that's already on your screen. So if you used one of the other selection tools, sometimes that's useful. Sometimes that's great to have. Then I made a little illustration for you. You can see my amazing drawing skills. And you know why I like light painting, where I use a flashlight and I can be really basic instead of other things. This represents how layers work. It's as if you're standing at the top. That's your eyeball looking down. Yeah. And these are your layers. The bottom is the original picture. Usually directly above my original picture, I have retouching. That's usually the layer sitting there. Out of habit, I call that layer Weeds Be Gone, because I think of it as pulling the weeds in my picture. On top of that, oh wait, what's that doing there? I'll have various adjustment layers. And it's as if your eyeball's at the top of the layers panel looking down, and in order to see your original picture, you have to look through these things to see it. And these are like different various colored filters or sunglasses or something else, which would be your adjustment layers. The mask makes it so it doesn't affect everything. And so that's why we always want to put our new adjustment layers on top, so that they only apply to what's underneath it, and it applies in a way that makes sense. If I add one down here, then it's hard to predict what you're going to get, because these are no longer going to be seeing what they used to see underneath. You're going to be changing what they're viewing, and it can be unpredictable. If I put my retouching here, then the adjustment layers affect the retouching as well, and everything works fine. The problem is, if I create a new layer up here on top, and I put my retouching here, and then later on, I make a print of my image or something, and I decide, hey, this adjustment layer right here is darkening the image too much. So I change it. Well, now these retouching bits will no longer match what's underneath, because what's underneath has been brightened, because you changed something that was underneath. If, on the other hand, your retouching is directly above the original image, it's the layer immediately above it, you can change these adjustment layers as much as you want. They only affect what's underneath it, and they'll affect that retouching and the original picture. So it looks fine. It's if you put your retouching on top, that now any change you make to what's underneath will make it so that retouching no longer matches what's underneath. If the brightness of what's underneath changes, then the retouching won't fit in with that. So I put my retouching directly above the original image. We'll talk about that when we get into retouching.
I have a question.
Yeah.
This might be really silly, but if you just move the layer,
Mm-hmm.
like you click and drag and move it, does it readjust for the placement that you've moved the layer?
If you drag the layer up or down in the layers panel, it will recalculate it. It'll say, okay, what am I now looking at underneath? What does that look like? And it'll reapply. And so if you change the stacking order of the layers and there are adjustment layers that you're changing, they can look different.
Okay.
I mean, if you want to see an example, I'll just do this, see if it helps at all. I'm going to apply an adjustment layer that takes all the color out of the image, black and white. Okay, I won't even move the sliders. Then I'm going to apply another adjustment layer that is called photo filter. Photo filter acts as if you put a colored filter in front of your lens. Mm-hmm. So it's going to add color. Let's make it so it's a little different than the original. All right. All I did was click on the square to get that color picker. Okay, so it converted to black and white, and then it did a photo filter which added color. Now, if I change the stacking order of these layers, well, if the black and white layer goes on top, it's going to be thought of as applied last. So we can't have this color still in it then. So if I drag this to the top, the black and white is done after it added the photo filter, the bluing effect. Mm-hmm. And so the results look different, right? And then if I drag, some of these others around, it's going to look different. So I always put new adjustments on top, so they're thought of as being applied after the other stuff. Mm-hmm. And I try not to change the stacking order of those layers unless I have a really good reason for it. Sometimes there'll be a really good reason, or sometimes it won't matter because a particular adjustment is only affecting this tiny area over here, and the other adjustment layers are not. And therefore, it's not going to matter if you move it. But as a general statement, I put new adjustments on the top of my layer stack, and I try not to change the order of them. And if I put retouching in my image, I will try to put the retouching directly above the background layer, and that way all these adjustment layers are applied to that retouching, and I can always add to or take away from the retouching, and it works fine. If I put it up on top, I end up with some issues, which I'll try to show you once we get into retouching.
Is that red overlay always red? Like
Doesn't have to be.
I was thinking about your clown picture where there was a lot of red in it. It would be a little off.
It's just the default. If I don't usually have to change it, so it'll take me a moment to remember where the heck it is. Mm-hmm. I thought maybe if I double-clicked on it, it would bring up the options for it. I double-clicked on it. I see the options, but I'm not seeing the setting for color.
Folks online were asking that question too.
There is a setting for what color the mask is. Here's a choice called Mask Options. It might be in there. Yes, it is. So what I did is I double-click on the mask, mm-hmm. which brought up this, which are the settings for that mask. Okay. And this is new to Photoshop CS6. This was laid out differently in CS5, so it'll be a little different. When you double-click on a mask in CS5, it might just pop up a window that lets you change the color. I know in a previous version, at least a few versions ago, it did. So anyway, I double-clicked, that caused this to come up. Then I went to the side menu of this and chose Mask Options. Okay. And this came up. This tells you what color it's going to use and how much you can see through it. And I'm guessing with older versions, especially 2 versions old, just double-clicking on the mask would have brought up that. Okay. All right. Any other quick questions about what we've done before I get into curves?
Yes, there are questions. Question from Seascape. When defining a mask, should it be slightly inside the object to avoid halos? What is the best way to not have halos in the image?
Is picking properly, picking the softness of your brush such that it matches the object you're painting around. If the object you're painting around has an absolutely crisp edge on it, you want a brush with darn near an absolutely crisp edge. If the object you're painting on is out of focus, then it needs a soft edge, and you need a soft edge brush. On this image, I primarily used a soft edge brush, which is not necessarily the best. The problem is, as you get to harder edge brushes, it becomes more critical to be precise. Softer edge brushes, you can be generic somewhat. So I used soft edge brushes on this one just so that I could keep things simple when I was describing things. And you'll see on some of my other images that I open that my masks are very precise. Oftentimes they were made with selections that I filled instead of painting.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Following that, from Nico Ha, how can I adjust, modify the cutouts of multiple masks that have the same cutouts at the same time?
You can't adjust more than one mask at a time, but once you're done adjusting one, painting on it or whatever, you can command click on the thumbnail for it, and that's how it loads it into a selection. Then click on another mask and use that selection when you're painting to limit where your paint shows up.
Right.
Or use that selection and fill with black or fill with white. And then you can get some of the same shapes.
Cool.
That kind of stuff. You can, if you want to see something kind of special, here's something you can do that might do some of what they're looking for. Let's say that I want to limit more than one adjustment to, let's say, the radio. What I could do is I can go to the bottom of my layers panel and click on the folder icon. That will create what's known as a new group. Then I can take one or more of these adjustment layers and drag them onto that newly created group. When I do that, they're going to become indented to show that they're part of the folder. They're inside. If I close the little triangle next to the folder, you'd see them go away, and you can expand them. So what I did there is I had a folder, clicked by the folder icon. I dragged some of the adjustment layers on top of the newly created folder, and now at the bottom of my layers panel, there's an icon that is a circle inside of a rectangle right here. That would add a mask to the folder. And then if I paint on that mask, what it would do is limit all of the adjustment layers that are inside there. For some of you, that'll be like your brain will melt seeing that. You're like, what the heck? But for others of you that have done this for a while and you're like, oh yeah, I'm used to masks, you'll be like, oh cool, I can do that. So it depends on what user level you're at right now. If your brain just went, what did he do? Then ignore it and come back and watch this later on after you're used to using them more. But if you've used them for a while, it can be really helpful to put some of them in a group and then mask the group. If I mask this group so that I painted on the fan, let's say, then none of the adjustment layers within that folder could affect the fan. That kind of thing. So I don't know if that would help him or not, but it's an idea.
Great. You want to take one more quick question?
No, sure.
This is from Slanger Photog. Do you use the pen tool anymore for making selections, and are there any advantages to that?
I do use the pen tool, and the pen tool is very useful for selecting man-made objects that have straight lines and smooth curves. Cars, dressers, that kind of stuff. But the pen tool is not a casual tool, meaning that you commit yourself to the pen tool to learn it, or it's one of those tools that you're kind of like, boy, some people are really good at the pen tool, but I suck at it. And that's how most people are with the pen tool. You either use it every day and you're really darn good at it, or you use it every once in a while and you really are terrible at it. And there's little in between. I find they made some changes in Photoshop CS6 that I really dislike with the pen tool, and I find that I use it a little bit less in CS6 because they tried to make it simpler by taking out some of its power. And so I use it a little less. But yeah, pen tool is great for man-made objects. Straight lines, smooth curves. So it'd be a very nice thing to learn.